Tem um boi na parede assim. Welcome back, everyone. So, starting with the first talk of this afternoon, it's a pleasure to invite a researcher from the Escola, Argentina, Dr. Jean.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers, especially Vasco Acevedo, for inviting me to present some of our results in this very interesting symposium. I feel a little strange talking in Brazilian French symposium since I'm representing a Argentinian group. So it's a little different for me, but luckily I work together with a lot of French groups and with Brazilian groups. So we have this nice sandwich type of work. So I don't know, I just talked about Vasco a few minutes ago, how we started our collaborations with Vasco. I'm actually the second generation of people from Serrera that's working with Vasco's group. My director, Fernando Sesma, who passed away a few years ago. We were just talking about that today. So I'm a little depressed now, but he started a collaboration with Vasco a few years ago, I don't know, probably about 20 years ago, working on genetically modified Lactobacillus bacteria. So during my PhD thesis, I met Vasco in Serrera when he was visiting us. So it was, since then, after Kaman passed away, I took control of his group and started working with Vasco. We had very, very fruitful collaborations together. And I remember presenting once in the Brazilian Congress of Microbiology, one of my results with genetically modified Lactobacillus bacteria against colitis, I think it was, or a strain that produced IL-10. And I remember Philippe was in the side as a speaker. When I finished my presentation, he congratulated me, said, very nice talk, Jean. Yeah, where did you get the strain? I was looking for a strain, Lactobacillus BL23. It was genetically expressed. I said, no, Vasco gave me the strain. I don't know why. I said, that's from my group. So why are you working with Vasco? Work with me. So that's how I started working with Philippe. So it's true, eh?
It's true. I remember.
Yes. I was like, what? So I really didn't know where the strain came from. So indirectly, I actually knew Philippe beforehand because I did part of my postdoc in another group in India, so I knew Philippe in the past way, talking every day. But yeah, then we started working together. We have a very fruitful collaboration with Philippe, with Luis Bermudez, and Jean-Marc Chatel. We've been working together with very good results and very good collaboration projects also. And now I'm here as the representative of Serrera, now the director of Serrera. So I was looking a little bit at the memory of Serrera, and I saw that there's over 20 researchers that have had in the past collaboration projects with different groups from India, from all over France. So obviously, our group, we work a lot with people from Jouy en Josa, Philippe Giraud, Jean-Christophe Piat, different people from Jouy. But we also have people that work with Yves Leroy from Rennes. Eric, I don't know if anyone said that word, but I'm sure somebody will work with you someday. And Bordeaux, Montferrand, all over France. So really, the collaboration between Serrera and France is quite strong. In Brazil, yeah, not so much. We have a lot of collaborations with Vasco and a few groups from Sao Paulo, but really we have very strong collaboration with the French group, and because the French have very strong collaborations with the Brazilians, so we really have a very nice combo consortium working together. So hopefully now that the pandemic has stopped, calmed down a little bit, we'll be able to start traveling and having these types of meetings more and more every day. So now, today I'm going to be talking a little bit about vitamin-producing lactobacillus bacteria against intestinal inflammation, cancer, and neurogenetic diseases. So before going right to my talk, I'm going to give you a brief overview, just a few slides, about Serrera. So for all of you that don't know what Serrera is, we're actually a research institute. We're not a university, so we're dedicated to research. And we're directly dependent from the national government of Argentina, so all of our salaries are paid for by the Argentine government, but the financing, we have to apply for grants too, so each individual researcher has to apply for specific grants. So we work, this is Sevilla, this is our old building, this is the new building, but I don't know if Vasco has seen the new building. But we used to work here in the bottom, so now we have a very nice building now. And we have a very close collaboration with the National University of Tucumán. So like I said, we're a research group, but we receive the students from the National University of Tucumán, where they perform their PhD studies. So they're enrolled in the University of Tucumán, and they do their PhD studies in Sevilla. So for those of you that don't know, Sevilla, we're located in the province of Tucumán, in the northern part of Argentina, which is climate is very similar to Belo Horizonte, very hot all the time. So people here would be very happy. This is a photo that we took in August. So yeah, I'm a little bit surprised by the numbers I'm showing on this slide now, because up till last year we had over 150 people in Sevilla, and now we have 100 because of the pandemic. We have a lot of people that have left research in Sevilla. We've been around for 46 years. So we're at a point where we're at a generation change, which is why I'm 45 years old and I'm now the new director of Escola, because there's not too many old people left that they already took their retirements. So we have 38 active researchers that are paid for by CONICET, and some who don't only work for CONICET, but are also professors at the University of Tucumán. We have 24 permanent positions in artisans that are paid for all by CONICET, and we have 36 PhD students enrolled right now in Escola. And we have quite a few undergraduate students that also do part of their undergraduate studies, and we receive students from all over the world. We stopped during the pandemic, but now we're starting receiving students from all over the world. Sevilla, like I said, is the Centro de Referencia para Lactobacillus. So in Spanish, this means that we're reference centers for lactic acid bacteria. And obviously, we work with lactic acid bacteria and related bacteria. So this is really the center of our research institute. So we have over 5,000 strains of lactic acid bacteria that are isolated from all sorts of ecological niches. So we have strains isolated from milks, from cows, from fermented foods, fermented vegetables, from the human body, from everywhere. And what we do, we use this lactic acid bacteria in three main fields of research. We use them in health, in agro industries, and for development of functional foods or biopharmaceuticals. So this is briefly just to give you a brief idea of, because we have 38 different researchers, and all 38 researchers have their own research line, working all with lactic acid bacteria. So just to give you a brief overview, if we think about lactic acid bacteria that we use for health, we know that we have lactic acid bacteria that have probiotic properties, because we know that they can stimulate certain health benefits to the host. We also have strains that not only are probiotic, but they can produce bioactive compounds. So we have strains that produce antioxidants, vitamins, lipids, enzymes, different biologically active compounds that can provide benefits to the host. Here, when I'm talking about the host, it's not only human health, but we also talk about animal health also. These bioactive compounds, or these beneficial lactic acid bacteria, we use them inside different food matrices. So here we use them in milk, in whey, in cereals, in legumes, in fruits, in order to ferment them or add them as probiotic cultures in order to obtain functional foods. And we also have strains of lactic acid bacteria that we use directly as treatments, so they're actually sold as biopharmaceuticals. Besides that, we work in agro-industries because we saw that our lactic acid bacteria can actually improve the raw material qualities. So we see that it can actually improve the quality of feed for certain types of animals. And also, we can actually improve the food quality for the consumption of people also. So a quick example, when we use grains, so here in Sevilla and in South America, we use a lot of soy products, different legumes, and we know that they have a lot of anti-nutritional factors. So here, lactic acid bacteria are able to degrade some of these anti-nutritional factors and can actually provide beneficial effects to the host and so on. And obviously, lactic acid bacteria, like the name says, it produces lactic acid, which is used as a preservative for some foods, but we also have strains that produce different antimicrobial substances, such as bacteriocins and different peptides, that can actually help in the biopreservation of different types of foods. Not only milk, but also we have foods that work with fermented vegetables, fermented meats, all sorts of different things. So this is a very brief overview, so if somebody has any questions afterwards, I'll be glad to answer some questions. So since we've been around for 46 years, we have quite a few products that we've developed and we have arrived at the market. So this is just three examples that I want to quickly pass by. So we have three different main research topics about our transfer of strains. So we have our bioproducts, so these are products that contain probiotic strains. We have our pharmaceutical products, so here's an example of a mixture of strains of Lactobacillus bacteria from our culture collection that's actually used to replenish the microbiota when people use long-term antibiotic treatments, for example. And we also have our social probiotic products that I'm going to talk a little bit about today. So just to give an example of two topics that we're talking about in general, I'm going to talk about one of our bioproducts and the social probiotic products, which are probably one of the pioneer studies that we've been doing in Sevilla. So the first is one of our bioproducts, which is called Sancorbio. So Sancorbio has been around. This is Dr. Guillermo Oliver, who's one of the founders of Sevilla, passed away a few years ago. But in 1994, there were physicians, doctors, from the Children's Hospital in San Miguel Tucumán. San Miguel Tucumán were a very small province where there's a lot of malnourished children. So the doctors at the Children's Hospital Tucumán went to Dr. Oliver and they asked him, they said, we have a very high incidence of infant diarrhea caused by malnutrition. And Dr. Oliver performed a lot of his postdoctoral studies in the Institut Pasteur in France. So here he came from France with the idea of probiotic, or at least beneficial bacteria. So Dr. Oliver, together with the physicians at the Children's Hospital in San Miguel Tucumán, what they decided to do was to isolate Lactobacillus bacteria from the feces of healthy children. And we're talking about 1984, so obviously with the techniques at that time, he isolated them with conventional microbiology techniques. He characterized the strains in vitro, identified them by the techniques available at that time. He validated the security, identified a few antimicrobial producing strains, and a few strains that showed promising activities. And with these selected strains, then they tested the strains in vivo models. So here they used mice models to see if the strains were able to stimulate the immune system. So here they used animals that were malnourished to simulate a little bit what the target population, which was malnourished children that had a very low immune system. So he found a strain of Lactobacillus, the Casei CRL 431. So this was our star strain at that time. So after that, we had the strain that's in the culture collection of Sevilla, and CONICET, which is our government agency that controls and gives us the funding, they called for bids to different dairy companies throughout the country to produce a probiotic product, including this probiotic strain. So since this was never produced in Argentina before, probiotics weren't very common. I'm talking about 1984 at this time, so here we're talking about 1988 when they called for the bids. So the company took some time before they were able to develop the technologies to have the food that actually had the probiotic strains that were still viable in a sufficient quantity to be considered probiotic and that would actually produce a physiological effect. So this took a few years. So during this time, instead of wasting time, they decided to do further studies. So here they did the first clinical trials in Buenos Aires in different hospital settings. And what they saw was that the probiotic strain was able to prevent intracardiac diarrhea, exactly what people in Tucumán were looking for. So after that, Sancorbio was actually, they produced the product. So this is the product they produced. It's available in all the supermarkets in Argentina. So it was actually started being sold in 1995. So this is actually the first probiotic sold in Argentina. We didn't have any strains. We didn't even have probiotic products imported at that time. But not only was the first probiotic product sold in Argentina, it was actually produced in Argentina using an Argentine probiotic strain. So this is very important from an economic point of view. From our institute, obviously, as a patriotic value from our country, that we're very happy that we developed something in-house. So this probiotic strain afterwards is now used worldwide under a license to Kristen Hans. So right now, this strain is being used in 80 different countries in different products being used directly in the catalog from Kristen Hansen. So this was a very interesting product that we actually received some funding. So when they sold the product, we received some of the money, and from the sale from Kristen Hansen, we received some of the money from the sales that comes to Sevilla so we can perform other studies in our research group. Unfortunately, the problem here is that Dr. Oliver at that time, he signed a contract that was very, I don't want to say negative, but a very bad contract, where they licensed the contract to only one dietary company. And the problem is the company went bankrupt. They started working. So because they had an exclusive license in Argentina, nobody else could produce this product in Argentina. So since 2017, this probiotic strain is not available for use in Argentina. It's still being sold in 79 different countries, except for Argentina. So it's very ironic that we can't use our own probiotic strain. So the idea here, besides that, so in order, so obviously now that I'm the director of Escola, I'm negotiating with Chris and Hansen, so now we're looking for a new contract where we're going to include various companies that have the ability to use this probiotic strain. And another problem here is not only that the company stopped producing this product, is that the idea of having this product was to give to malnourished children. So we're thinking of malnourished children. Why are they malnourished? Because they don't have the economic means in order to buy food. They have malnutrition because of that. So obviously, if these children don't consume milk, because it's very expensive milk, obviously the probiotic product costs a lot more than normal milk. So really, this wasn't reaching our original objective, which was to reach malnourished children in order to prevent these types of diseases. So we decided to change a little bit our chicken. We decided to say, yeah, this is interesting. Yeah, we have some money and everything, but no, not everything's money. Research to help society. We're government researchers, our salaries are paid for by the government. And we have a moral obligation to help the population with our research. We do basic research. After a certain amount of time, we have to provide results that help different problems in society. As scientists, that's our main goals. So what we did, we decided to develop a social product. So this is something that was very interesting, where here we changed the strains. We have a different strain. Here we have a Lactobacillus CRL1505. Then we saw that this strain was able to prevent diarrhea, reduce parasites, prevent respiratory diseases, and increase the immune response in immunocompromised children. So what we decided at this point is that we didn't want to make money with this. We really want this to reach the target population, which was malnourished children. So what we did a collaboration project between the government of our province. So what they did, the government provided the funding to do the research. Escola, we provided the academic, the knowledge, the know-how, and the strain. And we started working together with a very small dairy company in order to produce a probiotic yogurt. So here we use the yogurt starter cultures from strains from our culture collection Escola, and where we added our probiotic strain inside this culture. The problem is, we're in the northern part of Argentina. We're in San Miguel de Tucumán. We're not very dairy-rich province. So when we started producing these products, there's only about 10,000 liters of milk available in the province. So really, if we want to do a very large production, they didn't have enough production capability inside the province. So we had to import milk from different provinces from the country in order to produce this product. So this not only allowed us to produce a product, but it also increased the dairy product producing capability. So we actually provided jobs to new people that started farming, growing cows to produce milk, in order to improve the milk production in our province also. So really, they had different beneficial effects besides the product by itself. So the first product we came up with it's all the same product with the same probiotic strain. So first we came up with a yogurt. So we produced it in the yogurt pods like you find in the supermarkets. But we did a cost analysis, and it actually cost us more to produce the plastic for the pods than the product by itself. So it was quite crazy that we're wasting money on plastic that's being thrown in the garbage afterwards. So we started producing the yogurt directly into sachets. So this is a lot more economically available. So with the money that we had available, we could actually produce more of our product. So today, this product is actually being given freely to over 2,275 public school children every day, freely, 3 times a week, in over 500 schools in our province, and now in 8 different provinces in Argentina. So this, I have to go back a little bit. In the province of Tucumán, because we have this high incidence of malnutrition in children, the government, what they used to do is they saw that the school children, when they arrived, in Tucumán, we have 2 different types of schools. We have public schools and we have private schools. So obviously private schools are people that have higher economic means, and normally the most vulnerable populations go to the private schools, than to the public schools. So what the government, they observed that the children in the morning, in the middle of the morning, they were falling asleep in their classes, they weren't paying attention, they couldn't concentrate, so they couldn't study because really they were malnourished. So what the government used to do is to give them a glass of milk for breakfast with a cookie, so they could actually have a little bit of nutrients. So the idea was to replace this glass of milk with a probiotic yogurt. So this is what we started doing. So we replaced the glass of milk with our yogurt. So at first we started with our yogurt. The yogurt, we had the problem that the yogurt has to be refrigerated in order to give them to schools. Some we get it one has a topology very similar here to Veterinária. We have a lot of mountains on the side. In some of these schools, you can't ride by car. You have to go by using horses and mules. There are some people that it takes them over 12 hours on horse to reach the schools. So obviously impossible to reach to provide refrigerated product. So we started spray drying our probiotic yogurt. And so we had this spray dried product that what we did is we invited the teachers from these high or very hard to reach schools, and we brought them to Serena and we taught them how to produce a product directly in their schools. So this product doesn't have to be refrigerated, we send them the product directly in boxes, they keep it there, and we teach them how to produce a product directly in their schools. So here we had our yogurt, we had our Life and our spray dried yogurt. And obviously children are tired of eating yogurt every day, so we decided, well, we're going to make a chocolate milk for the children, because children like chocolate. So here, this is a chocolate milk that's not fermented, but we had actually a probiotic bacteria inside the chocolate milk. And we also did a probiotic cheese using the same probiotic strain. So really, this shows us that some of our basic research, we saw that it's actually reaching vulnerable populations. So really, it gives us great pride to say that we're at least we're providing a little grain of salt inside the great sea of something that really, as researchers, that we can be proud of saying, yeah, we're doing something that's helping at least some people in the population. So that's all I want to talk about Serena for now. If you have more questions, I can talk about Serena. So I'm going to go directly to the topic of my talk now. So in my group, I've been working for a few years on vitamin-producing lactic acid bacteria. So what I've shown in my group is that specific strains of lactic acid bacteria can actually produce vitamins, and these can actually be used in order to bio-enrich different kinds of foods. So over the years, in Serena, in my group, we've developed breads that are bio-enriched with riboflavin. We've developed potato-based vegetable spreads that are bio-enriched in folate. We have milks that are bio-enriched in riboflavin, soy milk that's bio-enriched in folate. We have soy milk bio-enriched in yogurt. We even produce pasta that are bio-enriched with folate and riboflavin. So, and we even show that some of these products that have very high quantities of vitamins through the fermentation process of these selected strains of lactic acid bacteria. And we actually show that some of these non-biofermented foods were actually able to prevent or at least treat vitamin deficiencies in our animal models. So this is very good. So here we saw that obviously vitamin deficiencies are very common throughout the world, and we saw that the vitamins being produced by the lactic acid bacteria are bioavailable and can actually prevent or treat vitamin deficiencies. But then we asked ourselves, yeah, so we saw literature that vitamins can have different biological functions. So we asked ourselves what we saw was that the vitamins were actually bioavailable to animal cells. But then after that, we asked ourselves, can the vitamins produced by our lactic acid bacteria provide other beneficial properties besides the nutritional value that they contain? So the quick answer is yes. And we saw in literature that riboflavin, which is one of the vitamins that we were studying that our strains are able to produce, we know that riboflavin has antioxidant properties by itself. It has antioxidant, it can decrease oxidative stress, it can decrease mitochondrial dysfunction, and it can actually decrease inflammation, the vitamin itself. Whereas folates can decrease the homocysteine levels in the blood, it can prevent prostate cancer, and it's been shown to have a protective effect against colon cancer. So since we had strains that produce these vitamins, we want to see if these beneficial effects could actually be produced by our lactic acid bacteria. So our hypothesis was that vitamin-producing lactic bacteria could actually confer anti-inflammatory or antioxidant effects. So one of the first studies that we performed here is that we fermented yogurt with an overproducing strain of Bact-Inflam that overproduces riboflavin. So here what we did, we tested this overproducing riboflavin yogurt fermented yogurt. And as control, we fermented yogurt with another strain of Bact-Inflam that did produce riboflavin. And we also had different control rules where we had different concentrations of riboflavin, where we tested different concentrations of pH, where we fermented with knockout genes of these strains. So we had different control rules. But for this talk, I'm just going to compare the strain that bio-enriched riboflavin and compare it to our control fermented soy milk. And we tested this in our TDS-induced colitis model with simulated Crohn's disease. And what we saw was that the animals that received the riboflavin bio-enriched soy milk showed a decreased weight loss. It showed lower macro microscopic damage in the intestines. It showed lower microscopic translocation to the liver, and it actually had lower pro-inflammatory cytokine releases in the intestines. So our soy milk bio-enriched with riboflavin, which was produced by our selected lactobacillus bacteria, so here we have a strain of Plantarum CRL2130, showed to have an anti-inflammatory effect in this animal model. Whereas we didn't see a beneficial effect when we provided the same product, which was fermented with the non-riboflavin producing strain. So here we had very interesting results, but here we were very limited that we had to use this food matrix. It's very complicated to do, complicated to produce. So what we decided to do was to study these same strains, but we wanted to administer directly the bacteria. So here what we did, we grew the strains as probiotics, we grew them, we washed them. We gave by gavage directly to the mice in the same colitis animal model to see if they had the same beneficial effects. So here we eliminated the need to ferment the food. So here we'll see if the bacteria could be useful by themselves. So here we tested different strains of riboflavin producing strains, and as controls, different non-riboflavin producing strains. And what we saw very similar results, whereas the animals that received the riboflavin producing strains were shown to decrease all the non-desirable effects of mucositis caused by this animal. And we saw that they had no beneficial effects compared to the non-riboflavin producing strains, and showed no beneficial effects in this animal model. So here, the oral administration of a riboflavin producing strain given as a probiotic supplementation, could prevent or chemically induced colitis in our animal model. So here, we showed that we could actually provide beneficial effects without using the food matrix. So this really opened the possibilities of us from using these strains in different matrices and different formulations. After that, obviously, in our group, we also work with cancer. We know that there's a very strict relationship between cancer and inflammation. So here, just give you some example where high alcohol consumption is related to inflammation of the liver, that can cause liver cancer, or smoking can cause lung inflammation and can lead to lung cancer. And we know that inflammatory bowel diseases increase the risk of having colon cancer. And obviously, people with cancer have to have treatments. So there's different treatments for cancer. A lot of the talks from yesterday, from the last 2 days, they talk about mucositis, which is a side effect of cancer treatments. So cancer treatments, here we talk about surgeries, about radiotherapy, about chemotherapy, immune therapy. The problem with these types of therapies is that they can cause undesirable side effects because they're not specific to the cells that are rapidly growing, the cancer cells that they're made to kill. So they actually kill all rapidly growing strains inside the human body. So one of the most popular, one of the most principal cancer treatments is chemotherapy. And one of the most common drugs that they use for chemotherapy is acid, which a lot of you have talked about that it causes mucositis, which is one of the effects because this drug causes an inflammation of the gastrointestinal mucosa, which is mucositis. So what we want to see first, we want to see if our vitamin-producing lactic acid bacteria with proven anti-inflammatory effects that we showed in our colitis model, which we showed in my previous slides, might actually be able to prevent the mucositis associated with the mucositis, which is an inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract. So here what we did, we tested a riboflavin-producing lactic acid bacteria in a mucositis model. So it's a very similar model to what a lot of Brazilian groups are working with. So here what we do, we use healthy mice and we induce mucositis, giving 5-fluorouric acid. I specify healthy mice in this case. And after that, we give bigavage, vitamin-producing or riboflavin-producing strains of lactic acid bacteria. And what we saw was that the animals that received the riboflavin-producing strain of Bact-Inflam CRL21 showed decreased diarrhea scores, they showed decrease in pro-inflammatory cytokines in blood and intestines, and it decreased the mucositis severity. So here we had different markers where we could actually evaluate the mucositis severity, such as damages to the gastrointestinal mucosa that we did through histological studies, and the higher ratio of the belly height, uncrit, and the crit depth. So here what we saw was that the oral administration of our riboflavin-producing strains was actually able to prevent mucositis that was induced by this chemotherapeutic drug. Whereas the non-riboflavin-producing strain didn't show the same effect. Like I said before, we have obviously different control groups. And one of the control groups we have in our experimental trials is that we actually give the bacteria, the mice, pure riboflavin. The seizure effect is due to riboflavin or to the lactic acid bacteria with something else. And what we saw was that our riboflavin-producing strains actually provided better effects than when we administered the riboflavin by itself. So it means that the bacteria might be protecting the vitamin or has different mechanisms of action. So here this is very interesting because it was able to protect against a side effect of cancer treatment. But the problem is, we want to see what happened with the cancer treatment by itself. So the first study that we did, we tested our riboflavin-producing strain, and we saw that it didn't cause problems with the anti-cancer treatment, the cancer treatment drug by itself. So here, this is the first study we did. We tested our riboflavin-producing strains together with copper-2 strains, which is a cancer cell line from the intestine, and we placed it together with 5-fluorouracil, which is the cancer treatment drug. So what we saw was that this drug was still active even in the presence of our lactic acid bacteria that produces vitamin. So our strain didn't affect the anti-cancer treatment, the anti-cancer potential that we were trying to obtain. It just reduced the side effect. Here, this is just in cell culture model. At least it provides us evidence that we not only prevented the side effect, but we didn't seem to affect the cancer treatment by itself. So after that, we started working with our folate-producing strains. So we did the same strategies. So here we tested different strains. So I just gave an example of 2 different strains of Streptococcus that produce folate. So we have strains of folates that produce either folate extracellularly and others that maintain folates inside the bacterial, the lactic acid bacteria. And here we tested them in the same healthy animals that received the chemotherapeutic drug to simulate mucositis. And what we saw was the animals that received the folate-producing strain, the Streptococcus 808, which had very high concentrations of folate inside the cell, was able to show a decrease in the severity of mucositis. So it showed the same beneficial effect that we saw with our riboflavin strain, but only the strain that had the high concentrations of folate inside the cells. And we also saw that the administration of the folate-producing strain of Streptococcus actually improved the chemotherapeutic treatment in the cell cultures. So here, not only did it didn't prevent the anti-cancer effect of single-fluorouracil, but actually improved it, and they actually killed more of the cancer cells in the cell culture model. And we actually saw that our folate-producing strains actually had anti-cancer treatment, anti-cancer potential in our cell culture models also. So after that, here we had different strains that produced different vitamins that had different beneficial effects. So what we decided to do, we started working with combinations of different probiotics. We decided to work with probiotic blends, probiotic mixtures, which are very common in the industry nowadays. Because we know that mixtures of probiotics can actually be more effective than the use of an individual strain. It's very hard to find one strain that provides many beneficial effects. So the idea here is to combine different strains that provide different mechanisms of action, that provide different benefits, put them together to see if we can have a nice mixture that can produce different beneficial effects. So these combinations can provide different beneficial effects, but we know that probiotic bacteria could actually have synergetic effects between each other. So here, working a little bit, continuing with our vitamin-producing strains, we decided to mix our vitamin-producing lactic acid bacteria. So here we mix our riboflavin-producing strains with our folate-producing strains, together with immune modulating strains that we already identified in our laboratory. So as a candidate for this mixture, we tested the strains Streptococcus that previously we saw in animal models that they actually had anti-inflammatory effects that we showed in our colitis model and in an animal model of colon cancer. So we had no idea if this immune-stimulating strain actually had beneficial effect in mucositis. We saw colitis, we saw colon cancer, but we didn't know if it had effect in mucositis. So we tested the strain, and we saw that the animals that received this immune-modulating strain of Streptococcus showed a decreased severity in the chemically induced mucositis also. So here, what we decided to do was to test this probiotic mixture in the same mucositis model. So here we tested our riboflavin brucus strains together with our folic brucus strain, together with our immune strain in our mucositis model. And what we saw was that your administration of the probiotic mixture that contained all three of these strains actually prevented mucositis caused by the chemotherapeutic drug in healthy animals. And we actually saw that the effect of the mixture was even better than when we tested each individual strain. So here I'm not saying we have a synergetic effect, but there's a combination of different mechanisms of action of how these strains are working. So we have strains that produce two different vitamins and a strain that stimulates the immune system. And together, they show better results than when we gave each strain individually. So this shows us that combinations of probiotics could be very beneficial. After that, we want to simulate a little bit more what happens in cancer treatments. So yeah, mucositis is a side effect of cancer treatments, but yeah, what happens with people that have cancer that are receiving the cancer treatment? So what we did, we decided to test our probiotic mixture in animals that have breast cancer. So here what we did, we had mice that we induced breast cancer. What we did, we have cell cultures of urine breast cancer that we induced directly, that we inject directly in the mammary gland of mice. And we wait until the mice grow with breast tumors. So once the animals have breast tumors, then we start giving the animals the chemotherapeutic drug, which is bifluoracil, which is the same drug we use in mucositis, and we gave them together with our probiotic mixture, and we want to see what happened in mice that had cancer that are receiving the chemotherapeutic treatment. And what we saw was that the administration of the probiotic mixture prevented mucositis caused by the chemotherapeutic drug. But here, these weren't healthy mice. These were animals that had cancer. So these were, like I said, these are 431 cells that were injected directly in the mammary tissue. More importantly, here we saw that our probiotic mixture didn't affect the effectiveness of the anti-cancer drug. So we saw that bifluoracil was still effective in the treatment of the mice that had the tumors. And we even saw that our probiotic blend actually showed to have an anti-tumor effect by itself. So this is the case in animals that had breast cancer, where we didn't give them the chemotherapeutic drug, we just gave them the probiotic mixture, and we saw that there was actually a decrease in the growth of the tumors in these animals. So our probiotic blend actually has an anti-tumor effect, at least in our animal model of breast cancer. In our laboratory, we've been working a little bit with the brain-gut axis. We know that there are many studies that demonstrate that there are numerous interactions between the intestinal microbiota and the enteric central nervous system. For example, we know that Parkinson's disease is directly associated with the alterations in the intestinal microbiota, and we know that this dysbiosis can alter the host immune response, and we know that this disease can actually cause neuroinflammation. So since we're working with anti-inflammatory strains, we decided we wanted to see if our anti-inflammatory strains had effects. In the literature, we also saw that vitamins have positive effects against with people that have Parkinson's disease. Not positive toward the disease, but positive for the people that are receiving the treatments. So here we saw that riboflavin, for example, has a neuroprotective effect by itself and can actually decrease neuroinflammation. Whereas folates can decrease homocysteine concentrations, like I said before, in blood, and that this decrease in homocysteine concentration can actually improve the motor dysfunction that's typical of people with Parkinson's disease. And thiamine, which is another vitamin that we have strains that produce thiamine, we know that it has anti-inflammatory effect, and it's actually being used as a treatment in Parkinson's disease. It's actually able to decrease Parkinsonian symptoms in humans. So our hypothesis was that probiotics that produce vitamins could actually serve as adjunct treatments against neurodegenerative pathologies such as Parkinson's disease. So our first study is in to study the neuroprotective effect of our vitamins, of our strains. What we did, we tested our riboflavin strain, our folic brucus strain, and our thiamine brucus strain in cell cultures of murine neuroblastomas. And what we did, we incubated these neuroblastomas with a neurotoxic drug. And after that, we placed these neurotoxic drug in the cells, and we lysed the bacteria, and we placed the cell extracts together with the strains. Why did we lyse cell? We did put live bacteria together with the neurons, because when we administer lactic acid bacteria orally, we don't want them to migrate to the brain. Obviously, this would cause sepsis, and it would actually kill the person. So the idea is that some compounds produced by the microorganisms produced inside the gut could reach the brain through the gut-brain axis and have a positive effect in the neurons. So here what we saw using our vitamin-producing strain was that cell-like stress of our vitamin-producing lactic acid bacteria. So here we had our vitamin-producing strains, our folate-producing strains, our riboflavin-producing strains, actually prevented the neurons cell death in cell cultures induced by the neurotoxic drug in the cell culture model. So here we have very positive results of cell cultures, and we decided to test them in our animal model of Parkinson's disease. So here we have animals that receive a neurotoxic drug, and to increase the Parkinsonian effects. And what we saw is that in this animal model, we saw, since we're trying to simulate Parkinson's disease, which affects motor function, so we do different physiological tests with the animals. I don't know if you see very well here in the slides, but here what we do, we have our mice and we have different tests. We have physiological or functional tests of the animals. The first of which is a vertical guard test. So what we do is we measure the time it takes an animal to go down the pole vertically. So if the animals lose the motor function, they fall directly, and if they have enough motor function, it takes them a certain amount of time. So we measure the average time that the animal takes to go down the pole. We have a similar study where we have the horizontal guard test, where we have to measure the animals if they maintain their balance, so they can walk horizontally on the guards. And in order to evaluate the fine motor functions, what we do, we stick a sticker directly on the nose of the mice, and we measure the time that it takes them to use both of their front paws in order to remove the sticker. So we do this, and what we saw was that the administration of our vitamin-producing strains, so here we tested our thiamine, folate, riboflavin genes, actually decreased the motor dysfunction associated with Parkinson's disease in this animal model. So this is what we saw with the individual strains. So after that, we started studying, obviously, our probiotic mixture that we saw that had very good results in the other models. So here what we did in the same Parkinsonian animal model, we tested our probiotic blend that consists of the vitamin-producing lactic acid bacteria with our immune-stimulating strains. And we saw that it improved the motor function. Now, like I said, through different tests that we have, the vertical guard test, the horizontal guard test, and the fine motor test. And what we saw is that when we gave this lactic acid bacteria orally by gavage, we saw that we were actually able to induce effects inside the brain on these animals. So what we actually saw that there's actually an increase in the tyrosine, the hydrolase positive cells, which is a marker for dopaminergic cells, which are typically lost in Parkinson's disease. So we saw actually an increase of these cells inside the animals that were receiving our probiotic blend. And we actually saw that there was an increase in the anti-inflammatory cytokine IL-10 in the brain. So this is bacteria that absorbed and had their effect in the intestine, and the effect was being observed in another region, which was the brain. Systematically, we saw in blood samples that this probiotic nature was able to decrease pro-inflammatory cytokines such as IL-6, TNF-alpha, and increase the anti-inflammatory cytokine IL-10. So here we saw that we proposed that the use of vitamin-producing strains could help in treatment against neurodegenerative pathologies such as Parkinson's disease. We're not proposing it as a treatment, we're proposing it as an adjunct treatment, the conventional treatments that some of them are actually functional, but to see if they can actually help these patients. So in final conclusions, we saw that certain strains of lactic acid bacteria improves vitamins that allow them to have antioxidant, immune modulating, and even anti-inflammatory properties. We saw this, that they were able to prevent or treat colitis, mucositis, breast cancer, and even Parkinson's disease in animal models. We also proposed that our lactic acid bacteria could provide patients with essential vitamins that are known in deficient due to the treatments. We know that people that receive long-term treatments, especially cancer treatments, the vitamin intakes or nutrients intakes in general can be affected because the drugs themselves can affect the bioavailability of the nutrients that people consume. And also, due to the side effects of the treatments that can cause inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract, so mucositis, it can actually affect the absorption of minerals. So obviously, if we give these lactic acid bacteria, we propose that it could actually improve the quality of life of these patients, providing nutrients to these patients that aren't able to absorb these vitamins through their normal diet. We even saw that some vitamin-producing lactic acid bacteria don't get treatments, which is very important, not only to prevent, and it's able to reduce the undesirable side effects. So yeah, a lot of you present results that were a decrease in leukocyte versus side effect. Yeah, the most important thing here is that it doesn't affect the primary treatment, which is to kill the cancer. Yeah, so here we have strains that prevents the side effects and doesn't affect the cancer treatment. So these lactase bacteria could actually be used because it's able to reuse the side effects. It could actually allow the patients to continue the chemotherapeutic treatment. Because normally in cancer patients, the treatment has to be stopped after a certain amount of treatments, 5, 6 treatments, because they have mucositis, they have a lot of side effects. So they have to stop their cancer treatment until their body regenerates itself, and then they can restart the cancer treatment after. So here we're able to reduce the side effects, so we could actually prolong the cancer treatments, and the cancer treatments could actually be more effective. Besides the fact that we have strains that actually have anti-cancer treatment, anti-cancer potentials by themselves also. So this also gives us an additional benefit. So based on all the results that are presented today, we propose that a mixture of selected strains of lactase bacteria. So here we propose vitamin-producing strains together with immune modulating strains could actually be used as complementary treatments against inflammatory diseases, certain types of cancers, and neurodegenerative diseases. Muito obrigado.
Any questions?
Anna. Hello, Anna.
Very nice results.
Thank you.
And especially the part with the gut-brain axis. That's very
It's new, yeah.
Yeah. And I was wondering if, because you said that when you add like the vitamin by itself, you have different results. So the lactobacillus itself has a role. Right?
Yes.
Do you think you didn't talk about that? But don't you think that maybe they have a role in modulating the microbiota itself?
Yes, no,
And
that's...
then maybe you can have another metabolites, another things.
No, definitely. This is... No, definitely. Our lactase bacteria, they could modulate the intestinal microbiota. But our main hypothesis is that the vitamins that are arriving from there, that the lactase bacteria are being used as a vehicle, so they can actually protect the vitamin before they reach the small intestine. So they can pass through the stomach. So more vitamin actually arrives in the intestine than when we give the vitamins orally by themselves. So we think it's more of a protective nature of the vitamin itself that the bacteria is used as a vehicle. But yeah, it's true. We don't know if the lactase bacteria can modulate the microbiota. The bacteria might actually stimulate the immune system or provide other compounds also. Here I don't go much in detail, but in most of our results we have genetically modified strains where we have strains that have been knocked out where the vitamin producing strain, the genes aren't present, so there we have a more clean control where we see that the only difference is that the vitamin producing capability where we saw that some of the anti-inflammatory effect are lost when they lose the capability of producing the vitamins. So this gives us an idea that vitamin producing is at least one of the possibilities of how the strains provide anti-inflammatory effects and anti-cancer effects. But yeah, it's true. They can provide a large range of mechanisms that the strains, we have to study a lot more. And yeah, microbiota is very complicated. And not only the strain, the vitamins itself can modulate the microbiota also. Oh, definitely, yeah. You've done a lot of work on this, so yeah, we know this quite well.
I have a question. I have two questions.
Two?
The first
There are possibly more, no?
very useful. The first question is, I'm not sure that you evaluated the advantage of the probiotic blend versus the single strains, because I didn't see this. In your paper, you directly use the probiotic blend and you didn't test single strains.
Yes, we did. I didn't put it in the slide, but yeah, that's why I put the conclusion that the probiotic blend is actually better than the individual strains. So
it's better.
It's better, yeah, it's a lot better because it has different mechanisms of action. But yeah, we saw that, we tested.
And concerning the choice of your single strains in the probiotic blend,
yes,
you try to choose the best one in each category. Folate, riboflavin, and immunomodulator.
Yes.
So you have the top three together.
Exactly.
Good job. And concerning, and concerning the potential use of this kind of, because you mentioned that you are very well involved in the market, do you think that you have any chance to put this probiotic blend?
We actually have 3 pharmaceutical companies fighting over these strains that they want to produce pharmaceutical products based on these strains, giving us a nutritional supplement. And one of them is actually interested in doing a clinical trial as a biopharmaceutical. But we're not really sure what we want to do with these strains, because the idea here is that we're still interested in using these strains to produce bio-based foods. So we don't want to limit ourselves to sell the strain to a pharmaceutical company just to make money. We still want to have the open possibility to use them in different products. We're thinking more of social products than.
And my second question concerns the choice of the Parkinson's disease preclinical model.
Yes.
I don't remember, is it the one where you are injecting amyloid beta in the brain of the mice or not?
No, this is induced by MPTP, which is a neurotoxic drug that we inject intraperitoneum.
And why did you choose this one compared to the one
because we actually have the other model that we just put it together now, because we couldn't import the alpha-synuclein, which has to be injected inside the brain. We didn't have the possibility to import the drug in Argentina at that time, but now we have it and we're putting it together now. So we did have the possibility of importing this neurotoxic drug.
And in fact, I have a last question.
You said 2, eh? Let's go about more, eh?
A kind of provocative one.
Don't worry.
I'm always careful versus probiotic mix, which would work on oral mucositis with 5-FU, and also in the Parkinson's disease model, because the common point between the oral mucositis model and the Parkinson's disease are not so evident for me. So how do you explain that your probiotic blend could?
No, that's why I put the introduction. Yeah, we think it's because the anti-inflammatory effect that the strains have by themselves. So we're thinking it's not a preventive model. It's the animals that have Parkinson's disease that have neuroinflammation. So we think that it's improving. It doesn't cure Parkinson's disease, but it decreases inflammation. So
because I think you can probably improve the screening of your strains.
Oh, definitely, yes.
Versus the Parkinson's disease.
No, definitely. No, definitely. We did this because we had anti-inflammatory strains. And, we know that Parkinson's disease has very increased neuroinflammation, which was our hypothesis at that time. But yeah, I agree with you. I think we can select more strains. We have 5,000 strains in Sagana that we can test.
Yes. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Very nice job.
Thank you very much. Yes, Luis.
Following the question of you demonstrated zero effects of the vitamins and strains in several conservation models. My question is, you perform a knockout analysis of these chains, and go into this web trace production of these compounds to verify this association in the production of these vitamins in the
Yeah, actually, we didn't perform knockout of the genes, which is something that we're hoping to do with Lasco's group next year when he has the CRISPR technology in his laboratory to produce knockout of the biosynthesis genes. But we have strains that overproduce the vitamins that we induce the overproduction using toxic analogs. So we have wild type strains, and we have strains that they're not modified, but we cause a selective effect with neurotoxic drug that have an overproducing phenotype inside of our strains. So we use these as a control. So we have strains that produce very little, the same strain produces very little amounts of the vitamin, and the same strain that overproduces the vitamin. So this is our control. So we have strains that it's exactly the same strain. The only difference is the vitamin that's being produced. But yeah, the cleanest control is going to be having knockout genes where we knock out not all the biosynthesis pathways. The folate biosynthesis, we know that there are 8 genes involved, but we know there's only 3 that are actually involved in the notoproducing phenotype that we've shown in earlier studies. Riboflavin, we know that we can knock out there's 5 genes. We know that if we knock out one of these genes, then the strain can't produce riboflavin. So we already have our target genes that we want to knock out in order to be able to have this negative control for our different studies. But yeah, it's something that we hope to do with Oscar's group or with Philippe or Jean-Marc's group, whoever wants to help us first, and we're open to collaboration. Thank you, Luis, for the question.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much.
Okay, so next, we'd like to invite the full professor of the Department of the Biochemistry and Immunology, Dr. Ana Caetano de Faria.
Okay, first I'd like to thank Pasco and the organizing people for this year meeting, for inviting me, and I'm sorry I could not come to see all the other presentations, but it was really a very complicated week for us, because the Society of the Brazilian Society of Immunology is organizing during this week, as you know, the Semana Nacional de Ciência e Tecnologia. So we are doing several events during the week, and then we have to do several things, including some other talks. But I'm sure it was really nice. I saw one of the presentations, and I'm sure the other ones were very good too. And it's very nice to see Jean-Marc, Philippe, and Jean-Guy that I haven't seen for a long time, right? Okay, so I think that probably the people from France already saw these results, because I told Pasco that they are the last ones that we have, and they are from Juliana's PhD thesis. But okay, but he insisted, because there are other people here, so I'm going to present anyway. So the title is this, our favorite Lactococcus lactis, which is the NCDO 2118. And this time we decided to test not only the anti-inflammatory effects of this bacteria, but also the possible effects in a phenomenon that we do a lot of research on, which is oral tolerance. And well, you all know very well that the mucosal surfaces are challenged all the time by 2 types of what we call natural antigens. One is the microbiota, so we have 100 trillions of bacteria in gut, associated with the gut, so providing a lot of stimulation, components, metabolites, and also antigens all the time. And also we have the diet, and the diet also provides a lot of components that are immunologically active, as Jean just showed us about the vitamins, but not only vitamins, but proteins and carbohydrates and lipids. Some of them, or all of them, they bind specific receptors in immune cells, so they have an effect that is not only indirect, but also direct in the immune system. And one specifically are the proteins which we can consider like antigens. So we have two sources of antigens in the gut, and most of the time when we have this stimulation, we don't generate an inflammatory response. On the contrary, what we generate is a phenomenon that was called oral tolerance, was described in the beginning of the 20th century, and was the mechanisms involved in oral tolerance were described during the 20th century. And what we know is, here I'm providing the, where is the point? So here I'm providing the experimental design for the oral tolerance. The oral tolerance is described as the specific suppression of an immune response to an antigen that had been previously presented to the immune system by the oral route. And how it was discovered. When you immunize the mice with an antigen in adjuvant, that's what you get, the famous immune response. You have a lot of antibodies, specific antibodies, and you also have a cellular immune response that is also specific. If this animal, before it gets the immunization, it gets the same antigen by the oral route, what happens is you have a suppression of this response. And oral tolerance seems to be an analog of the natural tolerance that we have to the autocomponents, to the self-antigens. So we are tolerant to whatever we eat, and also to the microbiota that we have. Because although those are not self-antigens, we can call them quasi-self-antigens, because they are incorporated to our body as nutrients, or they live with us as a consortium, like the microbiome. And this is very interesting, and many groups, including ourselves, have worked with the mechanisms involved in oral tolerance, and it's quite clear that oral tolerance develops by the action of many subsets of regulatory T cells, not only the traditional FOXP3 positive, CD4 positive T cells, but also TR1 cells that secrete IL-10, and also Th3 or LAC positive cells that are cells that produce TGF-beta, and these cells not always have FOXP3. Sometimes they do not express FOXP3. And so the mechanisms involved in oral tolerance are similar to the ones that are developed in the thymus for self-antigens. So you have the induction in the thymus, the formation of FOXP3 positive regulatory T cells, which are these ones that I'm representing here. But in the periphery, especially in the mucosal sites, and the intestinal mucosa is very special for this, you can also have the development of these regulatory T cells, and one that is very important is this one that I'm going to talk about, which is the CD4 LAC positive cell. This LAC is latent associated peptide, is a peptide that binds to the precursor of TGF-beta. So these cells have TGF-beta in their surface, and they also secrete TGF-beta. And we know that, as I said, oral tolerance, we have oral tolerance, we develop oral tolerance to food antigens and microbiota antigens, and the disruption of this tolerance is in the origin of allergy, food allergy, for example, celiac disease, and also inflammatory bowel disease. And what is known, and many researchers have working on that, is that when you get an antigen from the oral route, this is the lumen of the intestine. This is representing, this is the epithelial cells. Here is the pile patches, and this is the lymph nodes that drain the intestine. Most of them are mesenteric lymph nodes. So when you have antigens coming through the gut, cells that are macrophages, that are CX3, CR1 positive macrophages, take this antigen, they transfer to tolerogenic T cells, which are CDC1 or CDC2 cells, that are CD103 positive cells. CD103 is a receptor, is an integrin, which is alpha E beta 7, that drive the cells directly to the mesenteric lymph nodes, where they present antigens to naive T, CD4 positive T cells, and drive the differentiation of these cells into regulatory T cells. So that's why this CDC1 and CDC2, mostly CDC1, are considered tolerogenic T cells. They are very abundant in the intestine, and they are able to do this kind of differentiation. This is a review that we are publishing this year, showing a very interesting phenomena that we usually are not aware of. It is that the intestine is not a homogeneous organ, but it has different compartments and different regions and segments that are functionally are different functionally and also in the lymphatic drainage. So if you take the intestine from the beginning, the duodenum, until the rectum, we see that there is a gradient of contact with antigens. You know, the absorption, of course, in the small intestine, whereas the most of the microbiota are located in the colon. So you have a gradient of this stimulation to the intestine, and we have several functions that are different because of this, of course. So most of the absorptions take place here in the duodenum and proximal jejunum, for example. And also the intestine, these different regions in the intestine are drained by different lymph nodes. And in the work that we've done with Daniel Lucida, we described that the gut lymphatic drainage is compartmentalized, and the proximal gut lymph nodes are very tolerogenic. So you have a chain of lymph nodes. I don't know about you, but in our lab we used to take them all, the mesenteric lymph nodes, we take them as mesenteric lymph nodes, and then we pull them and do several assays in these lymph nodes. What we showed in this paper is that this is not a good idea because the lymph nodes are very different depending on the area, on the segment of the intestine that they drain. So, for example, here is a scheme showing that the drainage of the lymph node is done by, for example, the duodenum is drained by one lymph node that is here, which is the D2, and the D1 lymph node is not in the mesenteric chain, it's the same one that drains the pancreas. And it's very interesting because it has a lot of consequences on the type 1 diabetes, for example. So those are the two lymph nodes that drain the duodenum. And then you have another one that drains the jejunum, and the proximal jejunum, the distal jejunum, another one that drains the cecum, and the lymph nodes that drain the colon. And they are all different. So when you look at the gene lymph nodes, you can see, for example, if you look at the stromal cell composition, they are very different from one lymph node to another. If you compare duodenal lymph node and cecal lymph node, for example, and you can cluster them, these stromal cells, and they are very distant from the one from another. And even if you take this, what we call tolerogenic dendritic cells, these CD103 positive, CD11B positive, and CD11B negative cells, the CDC1, CDC2, even the same phenotypically identical cells. So if you pass them to a flow cytometry, they are absolutely identical, but if you do the transcriptomic of these cells, depending on the lymph node that they are different. They show the expression of different genes. And if we look for the composition of T cells in these lymph nodes, so this is the gut lymph nodes, duodenum, jejunum, ileum, and colon. And here's the same. If we look for Th17 cells, what we see is there is a gradient, so you have less cells in the duodenum, and you have a crescent of frequency of Th17 cells, which are inflammatory cells, as you go towards the colon. The regulatory T cells, FOXP3 positive regulatory T cells, is exactly the opposite. They are very much concentrated here, and they decrease in frequency as you go towards the pole. So there is a variation in several parameters, immunological parameters in these lymph nodes that drain the intestine, and this has consequences. So what we saw in this work is that the duodenum and jejunum, the lymph nodes that drain this area of the intestine, are more prone to induce tolerance than the lymph nodes that are in the ileum and colon. So when you test, the tolerance is mainly occurs in these lymph nodes that are proximal. And here is the region where you have mostly protective responses, inflammatory responses. And although we have this, so we have here the absorption of antigen, you have lymph nodes that drain these antigens, and so let's assume you have gut, the absorption of dietary antigens, for example, and it's not a coincidence that these antigens are all absorbed in the duodenum and the proximal jejunum. So that's why they induce tolerance very easily, because they are drained exactly to the lymph nodes that are have a very tolerogenic mediator. Here, when you have representation and generation of regulatory T cells, these cells go back to the intestine where they mediate the gut homeostasis, for example, but they also go to other organs. So oral tolerance, we know, is a kind of phenomenon that is generated in the gut, but has very strong systemic effects. And of course, because of this, oral tolerance have been researched, and our group has been doing some studies on that, as a way to induce specific immune suppression to target antigens, for example, which would be very desirable for autoimmune disease, for example, for allergy, and it's oral tolerance would be a very good strategy, because mucosal tolerance is antigen specific, so you would have a suppression that would not interfere with other responses. Administration of antigen is easy, and the efficacy in animal models that have been tested is very high. But, so here is just showing a chart. This is from a review in 2006, so this is not a paper, it's just to give you an idea. There are a number of studies doing several kinds of animal models for autoimmune disease where oral tolerance worked very nicely. And also some human studies have been conducted in autoimmune disease people, and not very successfully, and that's the problem. And because we know that there are some major issues in oral tolerance to be used as a therapy that have to be addressed first. One of them is the dose of antigen, that we need large doses of antigen would be very complicated in the clinic if you have to administer a purified antigen, for example, from the retina or from the pancreas to several times per patient. The choice of antigen is also a complication, but the other thing that is complicated is that oral tolerance is very good strategy to prevent an inflammation but it's not so good to cure an inflammation, to do something afterwards, to treat. So that's why our lab decided to work on these adjuvants of oral tolerance. It's clear that we have to have some way to have adjuvants that would be the opposite of what adjuvant used to be, because it's going, adjuvants usually help inflammatory responses, protective responses. What we want here are substances, agents that would help tolerogenic responses. And then we work with several kinds, we still work with several kinds of adjuvants, and one of them were these wild type and recombinant probiotics, and that's what Juliana decided to do, and she did in her PhD. The first experiments we did, we did all this with Vasco, in collaboration with Vasco's group, and the first one was when we used the HSP65 producing Lactococcus lactis in 2008. So those are the people who are the collaborators here, and Vasco and Anderson were responsible for constructing the recombinant Lactococcus lactis. This I'm not going to talk about because you know more than I do. That is a gram-positive bacteria, non-invasive. This is very important, it's endotoxin free. So that's why we choose it, because for the gut it would be very important. So would go into the tolerogenic way, in the tolerogenic mode, and remains not, it doesn't colonize, which is very important as a therapeutic device as well. So you can interrupt the treatment whenever you wish, and it would go off. And we use this Lactococcus lactis that produce HSP65 from Mycobacterium leprae. It was here in a vector. So it was secreted, and what we thought at the time was that Lactococcus lactis would mimic what happened when the mice drinks the antigen, which we know is the best way to induce oral tolerance. If we put the mice to drink the antigen for the whole day, this is wonderful, it's the best way to oral tolerance. So this is very difficult in the clinical set, so we thought, well, if you have a bacteria that just secretes the antigen, we give the bacteria goes to the gut and keeps secreting the antigen there, so it's the same as if it was. So we thought of Lactococcus lactis, the recombinant Lactococcus lactis, as a delivery device that would be in the gut delivering the antigen. Only that, because we are not microbiologists, we are immunologists, and we are only interested in the antigen. But when we saw the results, and was the first paper that we published, it was in 2013, and Rafael Rezende at that time was the postdoc in the lab. We did that, we did for 4 days the treatment, and then we induced EAE in the mice, which is encephalomyelitis, autoimmune encephalomyelitis, which is animal model for multiple sclerosis. And this is the clinical score for the disease. So as you go up, you have more paralysis. This is for motor disorders. So this is the mouse that didn't drink anything, it just had EAE. If you just give them Lactococcus lactis, nothing happens. So although it is anti-inflammatory, it doesn't solve the problem. But if you give the HSP65 producing Lactococcus lactis, the HSP65 have a wonderful way, because it's an antigen, it's a very potent antigen, because it's a heat shock protein. And so we induce tolerance to the heat shock protein. And then we tested, and in fact, the mice was tolerant to the heat shock protein. And we know heat shock protein is highly expressed in all inflammatory sites. So this mice was inflamed, so in the myelin, so you get a tolerance to the inflammation, the myelin inflammation. And sometimes, depending on the immunization, we even get better. So this is the treated mice. And what we saw, let's see. So here you have these 2 mice. These are the ones with the disease. So you can see they get paralyzed. And when you give them the Lactococcus lactis with HSP65, you can see that only the tail is a little bit down. The rest, they are really happy in the cage, so it works really well. And when we test what happens, we see that there is a huge increase in CD25, CD4 positive, LAC positive cells, the ones that secrete TGF-beta, in all the lymph nodes that drain the brain and also the gut and also in the spleen. And if we remove these cells, if we deplete LAC positive cells, we lose the effect. So this is the mice with the disease, the one that gets Lactococcus, and this is the one that gets Lactococcus, and we deplete the LAC positive cells. So we will lose the result, the so we lose the effect, showing that these cells were very important, not FOXP3 positive cells, but LAC positive cells were very important for generating the oral tolerance effect here. Of course, we did this in other models because HSP65 would be expressed wherever we have inflammation. So we tested in chronic arthritis. Guilherme tested it. This we published it in 2019, and then colitis, and Ana Cris did that, and colitis, and we did the mucositis, was Patricia, and the last one was the leishmania infection that we showed that even was good for the lesions in the leishmania infection. And so the question that Juliana asked was a little bit similar to what Jean-Guy was showing here and asking about this bacteria was what this Lactococcus lactis, this specific strain has that would help oral tolerance. We could not separate HSP65 and Lactococcus lactis to do these experiments, so we use another antigen, which is OVA, which is much cheaper than buying HSP65. So here, Juliana standardized a protocol of oral tolerance where she gives ovalbumin and she gives a dose of ovalbumin by the oral route that's suboptimal dose. So what you can see, this is the immunized mice, this is antibodies against OVA. If you give OVA at 5 milligrams per ml, you have a decrease, but it's not significant. It means you do not induce a real oral tolerance, a strong oral tolerance, and that's what we want to do, because we want to test if you give OVA plus the Lactococcus, the MCDO, what happened? Would it improve the result of oral tolerance? Would it be an adjuvant, tolerogenic adjuvant? And what she found was it worked like that. So here you have oral tolerance. This is significant, this suppression. So if you add Lactococcus lactis to the antigen, with the same dose, 5 milligrams, you have an adjuvant effect. And we tested with another Lactococcus lactis, commercially available strain, which is GB25, and it doesn't have any effect. So we don't know if MCDO is the only one, but at least with this strain, it's not true for all kinds of Lactococcus lactis. And then we look at these cells, our favorite, the LAC positive cells, and what we saw in the mice that got MCDO, you have an increased frequency of these cells in the spleen and also in the mesenteric lymph nodes, which drain the gut. So MCDO, but not G5, has adjuvant effects for oral tolerance induction. And then we looked for the tolerogenic dendritic cells and LAC positive cells in the gut. So we look in the lamina propria of the gut, whether you have generation of the cells or whether they are augmented there. And what we saw was that in the lamina propria you have an increase in the tolerogenic dendritic cells, the ones that are CD103 positive, and you have a decrease in the ones that are CD103 negative and are inflammatory disease dendritic cells. And you also have increasing macrophages, CXCR1 positive macrophages, the ones that uptake antigen in the gut. So we decided to look in the compartmentalized lymph nodes because we know our tolerance is induced in the duodenum and jejunum, and these differences we found the same exactly in the regions that we looked for. So we saw them in the duodenum, increase in the duodenum and proximal jejunum of the CDC1 cells. We saw a decrease in the CDC3 cells, the ones that are inflammatory, and we also see an increase in duodenum of the lab-positive cells, showing that in the region that they are supposed to be, because they are tolerogenic, under the effect of MCDO, they are there. So the allelites increase these tolerogenic cells, increase regulatory T cells, and even the macrophages that take up antigens in the gut. So we tested it not only immunizing, but we did a model of food allergy to see whether it would prevent food allergy, would increase the prevention of food allergy. And here is the protocol. We have allelitis, plus we do for 4 days, and then we give a gavage of ova, one single gavage of ova. You see it's not enough to decrease the parameters of allergy. This is the IgG1. This is a specific IgG1. This is specific IgE. And we see that only when you put NCDO that you have the decrease. And also only when in NCDO you have lab-positive cells. And FOXP3 positive cells, as we have previously shown, does not participate very much in the effect of Lactococcus lactis. And here you can see the histology. This is not, the image is not very good, but you have a decrease in eosinophils in the gut. So it works for food allergy as well as for the immunization. You improve oral tolerance when you add NCDO 2118 along with OVA. And then we look at the mechanism. What the Lactococcus lactis was doing. And our hypothesis was that Lactococcus lactis would alter the microbiota profile and increase the secretion of lactate. Why lactate? We know that many bacteria that we consider like anti-inflammatory in the gut produce metabolites that are anti-inflammatory, like short-chain fatty acids and lactate, for example. But we know that the main product of fermentation in this bacteria is lactate. So that was the best candidate for that. So we looked for these tolerogenic effects to be mediated by lactate. And then first we did a measurement of the short-chain fatty acids, acetate, propionate, butyrate, and also lactate, which is not short-chain fatty acids, metabolite. And what we saw, it increases when you give NCDO, but after oral tolerance, you have actually a decrease in acetate, some increase in propionate, butyrate doesn't do much, but you really have an increase that is consistent. When you do NCDO, after you did the administration of the Lactococcus lactis, and after oral tolerance using Lactococcus lactis, you have a consistent increase in lactate in the feces of the mice. Then we decided to look at the microbiota. I'm showing this just as like illustration, but we send the feces to be sequenced to do a 16S sequencing. We just got back the results, so we are going to have a much clearer picture of what happened in the microbiota. The only thing that we saw here is there was a difference in the ratio of firmicutes versus Bacteroidetes. We have a decrease in Bacteroidetes and increase in firmicutes, so we have a different ratio here. And when we look at the effect after oral tolerance, the only thing we could conclude is that we have a balanced distribution of this filler in the mice that after oral tolerance with NCDO. Now we're going to see the results of the sequencing, but our hypothesis is that we're going to find an increase in bacteria that would be more anti-inflammatory and more tolerogenic in the intestine. And I'll show you in another occasion in the future. But then Juliana decided to look which components of the Lactococcus lactis would be tolerogenic, and then she did a heat inactivation of the bacteria with the heat and with the radiation. It's different because with the heat you have a rupture in the membrane, with the irradiation you don't, and she also uses the supernatant. All of them have good effects in the in oral tolerance. And then she decided to use lactate itself to see whether if you use only lactate, you would reproduce the results that we found with Lactococcus lactis. When we use the same amount of lactate that we found in the supernatant of this bacteria, which is 15 millimolar, then we don't have the same effect. But when you use 50, which is a little bit more, then we have exactly the same effect. So 50 millimolar of lactate works very well as an adjuvant of oral tolerance using ova as the antigen. And then we decided to look, we know that there are some receptors for lactate that are expressed in the gut, in bacteria, and also in lymphocytes. And we know the main receptor is GPR81. GPR81 is not only expressed, but there are some work showing that GPR81 knockout mice have inflamed intestinal mucosa, just showing how important lactate signaling in the intestine would be for gut homeostasis. And what we saw is that when we administrate Lactococcus lactis, when in NCDO, we have actually an increase in the expression of this receptor in the small intestine, in the cells of the small intestine. And then we decided to test whether the receptor would be really involved. So we used agonists and antagonists of GPR81 to see whether we could reproduce the effect of lactate in oral tolerance and block the effect of lactate. And indeed, we found that. So this is the ova alone does not induce oral tolerance. There's no suppression. With the agonist, you have the same effect, so you have a suppression as if we're using Lactococcus lactis or lactate. And if you use Lactococcus lactis ova, but we block the effect of the receptor, then we use the effect. So we think the lactate is really important. The problem is it's not the problem, but the mechanism is probably not due to the lactate that the Lactococcus itself secrete, because we have to use a concentration that is more than double. So we think is that what happened is that this is a nice slide. This is a work by Pamela Agresci from Vasco laboratory. What she's showing is that the Lactococcus lactis indeed is located in the duodenum. And this is not a surprise because the lactic bacteria usually are in the proximal part of the intestine. I don't know the people from Icaris, they know that better than I do, but usually that's what we get in the literature, that the lactic acid-bacteria, they are preferentially located in this area, which is perfect because that's the area where oral tolerance is induced. So this is a nice finding for us. And what we think is happening is that Lactococcus lactis is probably changing the composition of the microbiota, favoring the growth and expansion of other bacteria that also secrete lactate, so you would have more lactate in the intestine. This lactate would bind to GPR81 in the epithelium probably, and probably in the CDC1s, in the tolerogenic dendritic cells, and enhance their capacity to induce the differentiation of CD4 positive, LAP positive cells in the gut lymph nodes. So that's the mechanism that we're trying to prove. We just saw that these cells are increased, so this is really associated with the administration of Lactococcus lactis. We have to prove that the microbiota is really changing in that way. And we also think, since we found an increase in the CX3, CR1 positive macrophages, which are the ones that take up antigen, and we think that maybe there is a participation of these cells as well, because when we tested, we saw that these cells specifically have an increase in the expression of another lactate receptor, which is GPR31, that is specifically increased in CX3, CR1 positive macrophages. So that would be our graphical abstract, our proposed mechanism for the how this Lactococcus lactis not only is an anti-inflammatory agent, but can be used as an adjuvant of oral tolerance. This is just to thank the people in the lab. Juliana is here, and this is all the students, and this is the student who was from Vasco's lab that spent some time in my lab as well. So thank you very much.
Questions?
You are the one who's going to analyze all the data of the sequencing that we are getting.
But it's much more curiosity than what you have presented for us. In Brazil, for example, the populations that normally or usually live, the people that were born and live in the seaside, they eat a lot of seafood. From the little infancy to when they are adults. And the people, for example, in the middle, like here, Minas Gerais, Goiás, they don't have this during their lifetime normally. Do you know if there is, for example, the oral tolerance for seafood, especially shrimp and mollusks, are more widespread in the seaside living people, and if the people that live in the countryside, far from the sea, for their whole life or most time of their life, they more allergic to seafood?
That's a very good question. We know, I did that in my master dissertation, actually, long time ago, that oral tolerance decreases as you get old. But it does not disappear. You have less susceptibility. There are lots of things that are changed during aging, and this is one of them. So you decrease the tolerogenic capacity of the intestine. So there is this phenomenon. As you get old, you have less capacity. And this is something that happens in the immune system in general, since we have the thymic atrophy. So you have less lymphocytes, our repertoire is less diverse, you have a more oligoclonal repertoire, so we are less able to respond to novel antigens as we get old. And this is a very problematic thing for vaccination, for example, because of course kids are much easier to vaccinate, and it's a problem for oral tolerance as well. It does not disappear, but it's less efficient. So I don't know if there is epidemiologically evidence that the food allergy is more prevalent here, even because now probably we have shrimp here as well, but there was a time that was very difficult and very expensive. So I don't know if there is that, but I would guess that potent allergen is the one that you found in the shrimp, for example. You have two kinds. You have tropomyosin, which is in the muscle of the shrimp when you take the shells, and another one that is even worse that are in the shells. And they are very, very homogenic. And we are doing now a model. We are in Bahia with Claudia Brodsky in Fiocruz, which is an experimental model for shrimp to test all these things. And I would guess that as you get old, you are less capable. So if you are going to eat shrimp, it's better to eat when you are younger, start when you are younger. And I think it makes the whole sense when you think about evolution, because this thing of going this way and that way and globalization and this is a recent development of humankind, right? Usually people have traditional habits. If you go to these very traditional communities, they eat something, they start eating when they are young and they eat for the whole life. So I think it's something that has some sense with evolution, that those communities would establish their very strong oral tolerance when they are younger, and it persists for the whole life, and they don't change very much the habits. But we used to kid about that to joke about that in the lab, that if you are very old in the countryside of Minas Gerais, you never eat shrimp in your life, probably it's not a good idea to start. But I mean, this is just a guess. I don't know.
People that, exactly in that case, that lives most of their life in Minas or in wherever, in some part of inner Brazil, far from sea, and they were not accustomed to it.
They're not used to. Yeah, but there is another thing that I would not would make it easy is that oral tolerance actually can be very easily induced even in old mice, for example, if you use a very good protocol. If you leave the mice drinking the antigen for the whole day, for example, then you can induce oral tolerance even in mice with 70 weeks of age, which is a mouse with 1 year and a half, and mice, they live 2 years. So this we did as well in our lab, we tested that. So this means that the susceptibility decreases, but if you use a right protocol, optimal protocol, tolerance is there. So it depends how they eat. They should eat very, like during the day, small portions, not everything.
Not just a moqueca. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question.
Any other questions?
And did you compare the administration of lactate itself compared to your strain? I didn't catch this.
Yeah, we did.
You did this?
Yeah, we compared.
Have you any advantage with the administration of the
lactate? Yeah, we compared with 2 doses. One was 15 millimolar, which is the amount that produced by the lactate. It doesn't work. But if you use 50, which is much more than the double, then it works. That's why we think it's not the lactase itself that is secreting, but probably it secretes and also it modifies the microbiota and favor the appearing of all the strains that also secrete lactate, so you have a lot of lactate. Because if you put lactate at 50 millimolar, you have exactly the same effect.
Okay.
So, which is good, if you think in terms of therapeutic purposes, it's good. And also, you saw, when you block the lactate receptor, the GPR81, if you block, then you lose the effect.
Yes.
If you lose an agonist, so I think lactate is a good candidate for.
Very nice result. And in terms of microbiota analysis, you have a significant decrease of bacterial test, and significant increase of fertility test. Which species did you
actually,
monitor?
this was done in the Analucia Brunel lab, and I didn't show all the results because we didn't complete the series of the experiments. We stopped in the middle.
Have you an increase of cultivate producing bacteria?
No, we didn't go to that. And then now we sent for sequencing.
This would be very interesting to study and to explore.
That's what we hope for.
To explore deeply.
We can compete with the panel that they have there and look exactly for this.
Okay, great. So, nice talk.
And also, Ari is going to help us analyzing the sequencing data. So, I think in like 1 month, maybe, right? 1 month we can give this answer about which kind of species are overgrown. Okay, thank you very much for
I'm a bit curious about the lactate produced by the side of cells. So our immune system doesn't have contact with this at all?
That's a very good question. It does, but I think that the lactate has an effect specifically in a region of the intestine where oral tolerance is induced, because it has adjuvant effect when you put along with the specific antigen. In this case, it's alpha. So when you administer the antigen that you wish to get tolerance for example, and then you give lactate at the same site. And then they get absorbed in the duodenum, as I showed you, where you have this right tolerogenic dendritic cells that take up the antigen, goes to the right lymph node, which are the duodenal ones, and then they generate specific T cells, regulatory T cells, specifically for that antigen, and that's why you have a specific suppression. So I think, lactate is a common substrate, of the metabolism, but when we give that, you give in the right place to be catched by the right cells in the intestine, in the right region of the intestine, which is the duodenum. So I think that's the trick.
Thank you very much, Professor. So now we are having a 15-minute break.
I'm going back. Wow. Sometimes I wake up there.
No. And so, and suddenly that's what I think. On the training, on the education, and yes, and you can learn also from your PhD, I think it will be very interesting. And I think you can test every two strategies, probably Sharp has told you that you can either try to produce and secrete the protein itself or deliver the secret. In fact, for example, so, unfortunately, we're not able to produce it as a biological reactor. So we moved to CTA, and it worked very well. We also had this device, for example, and we administered CTA of the map was produced maps, and they were protected against this sort of thing. It's a very interesting strategy also, and this strategy worked always because it's not difficult, it doesn't matter. You are constantly plasmid with an expression cassette with Alexandra, for example, and with the promoter, cyclopically promoter, which is not expressed. So we don't have any toxicity effect, or you understand? Because with the protein, we don't know. In fact, it's very strange and unexpected. For example, we have very successful anti-protease, which is called elafine. When we started, we saw that there are disulfide bonds, there were some post-translational modifications that bacteria are not able to do. So we were very not so optimistic. And unexpectedly, we are able to produce it as a biologically active protein. So I didn't catch why it worked so easily. And for now, we knew that it was going to work. Even after 8 years, we are not able to produce it as a biologically active protein. So we are delivering it as a CDA. But you look in the biotech company, for example, in Canada, I think that there is a company which is called Synthio, and I think they raised something like $1 million in order to evaluate the vaccination rate using the recombinant bacteria, able to deliver less than 5 deaths of and it works. They are testing it so, what are your strategies again? Okay? Okay. This would be a good solution. So maybe the book for me will not be but using some so that is a very hard case, but we did this. So I was very optimistic and said smaller operations, and in fact, maybe we can improve just how to organize so you can become 1 year. It can be done in the frame of the if it's renewed, I think Kind of special delivery system for medicine. Is it you or not?
Professor Angélica Vieira.
So thank you, Vasco, especially for the invitation to be here. I believe me that I will try to be very short because I know that the night yesterday was very, intense. So what I will present today for you is how the gut microbiota metabolites can affect host lung defense and against bacterial infection. But I will bring a little bit of the overview of what we have been done in the lab, especially for the last past year with the COVID. And yeah, I think you will enjoy that. So I will try to skip the introduction because I'm pretty sure that all of you are very well known what is the microbiota, but I want just to highlight the importance of that we care more genome of microbiome than our own genome. And of course, amount of genes is very important for the function of this microbiome. That's what I want to discuss here. And also the importance that how the specific composition of bacterial microbiota is important to differentiate the immune system, differently. And but also what I want to tell you and remember you that again for all beneficial effect that we can give to the microbiome, the metabolic function that the microbiota has for us, it's such important as our metabolic organ that deliver. And also, I want to remember you that the composition, the equilibrium of the microbiome composition is very important for the gut homeostasis, for the host homeostasis. And there is many factors that can impact and alter the equilibrium of the gut microbiome. So we have two conditions that are very important. For example, we know that many factors can contribute to restore the equilibrium of the gut microbiome, especially, for example, diet. I will highlight here the importance of high fiber diet to promote the production of short-chain fatty acids, especially from these commensal bacteria, but also factors as diet, considering, for example, Mediterranean diet, Western diet, sorry, that are characterized by low intake of fiber and high fat composition. They can induce dysbiosis of this microbiome, and they can promote the dysregulation of the immune system, then inducing inflammation. But how this microbiome can impact the lung? So there is a lot of work showing that there is a connection between the lung and the gut. And the main axis that we have been seeing is that the production of the metabolites on the intestine, they can go systemically, and they can activate the inflammatory cells in the lung. There is a lot of papers showing, including for our group, showing that first, that there is a lot of infection, lung infection, that can impact direct the composition of the gut microbiome. But also, there is a lot of papers showing one mechanism that these metabolites produced in the gut, they go to the lung, and they can activate the inflammatory cells in the lung, and then they can contribute to defense of host lung defense against many pathogens that not include only bacteria. So just to highlight the importance of the factors that can contribute to the alteration of these metabolites in the gut, we have been showing that when we compare mice that are under high fiber diet with mice that consume a normal diet, there is no much significant alteration when we did the 16S sequencing of the feces of these mice. However, if you look for the production of acetate, that is one of the most abundant short-chain fatty acid produced by commensal bacteria, we can see that in 7 or even 14 days, we have high levels of acetate in the circulation, the blood circulation. So what I want to say here is that you don't need that changing on the structure of the microbiome, but the functionality of the microbiome are impaired here. But what makes us on this result that take our attention was when we gave mice a low fiber diet. I mean, we deplete all the source of fiber on the diet of these mice. Then we could see that there is a stronger change on the gut microbiome composition. So what I mean here is that, okay, it's good to eat fiber, of course, but it's more harmful for the host if you don't eat any type of fiber. And then we have described one of the mechanisms, how there is this connection between the acetate production and the immune system. And what we have been found is that the beneficial effect of diet seems to be dependent on the activation of the GPR43, is a G-coupled receptor, 43 receptor, that is highly expressed on epithelial cells in the gut, but also on inflammatory cells. So what we have been done, and we have known is that mice that have received a high fiber diet and they are induced with colitis, we could see that the high fiber diet protect mice from the colitis damage in the intestine. But when we treated GPR43 mice, knockout mice, with the high fiber diet, then these beneficial effects disappear. So suggesting us that one of the mechanisms that the high fiber diet produce to colitis depend on the activation of the GPR43. And we explore more this mechanism to understand the downstream signaling from the GPR43, and we found that on these mice, epithelial cells of on these knockout mice, they have deficiency of activation of an intracellular pathway, that is inflammasome pathway, that we have been shown that it's a very important activation of inflammasome on epithelial cells in the gut. It's very important to keep the epithelial barrier. And I just want to highlight that it's not only acetate or only fiber that can promote this connection between the gut microbiota metabolites and the host immune system. That Anna has mentioned here the GPR81, for example, but there is a lot of different type of food that can stimulate different types of metabolites produced by different bacteria in the gut, and they can bind to different receptors that are expressed differently in different cells. So it's a very complex connection. So just increasing the complexity of microbiome, but also how these affect the host immune system. And we explore, this paper was published in 2009 with Charles McKay group in Australia, where we described for the first time the activation, the importance of the GPR43 receptor activating by acetate that are produced by commensal bacteria from the microbiome. And we have found that in several models as colitis, the GPR43 are more susceptible to the model of colitis by DSS, but we also saw that in disease that is not affecting only the gut, they also have effects. So the GPR43 knockout mice were more susceptible to develop asthma and also arthritis. And in this paper, we found that the GPR43 is very high expressed on inflammatory cells. That is very important on the development of this disease, as neutrophils and eosinophils as well. And then we explored during my PhD in the group of Mauro Teixeira here at UFMG, that we found that by inducing arthritis model, gout arthritis model, that what is interesting of this model is that to development of inflammation to gout, the inflammation is 100% dependent of inflammasome activation. And neutrophils is one of the main cells that participate on this. And what we found is that when we treated mice with acetate and we induced gout by injecting MSU crystals in the joint, we found that mice that were treated with acetate, they had reduced of inflammation, of infiltration of neutrophils late on during the development of the disease. And this effect is also dependent on the concentration of acetate. So we need to increase the levels of acetate to see this effect of reduction of inflammation in the joint of these mice. And what's interesting is that we found that neutrophils of mice that receive acetate, they express more pro-resolutive mediators as actin-1. So suggesting us, and also they induce the effect that is very important for the resolutive phase of inflammation, that is the efferocytosis. So that means that neutrophils are high, suffer high apoptosis, and then the macrophage clears the inflammation very well by phagocyting these apoptotic forms of neutrophils. So these results suggest us that the acetate, I mean the metabolite produced by the gut microbiota, they are very important to induce pro-resolutive mechanism on host. And this was one of the first papers showing that this pro-resolutive effect, because before we thought that these metabolites, they had more anti-inflammatory effect, but no, we are seeing that they do not inhibit inflammation, but they contribute to accelerate the clearance of the inflammation. And with that, of course, what we decide to look at is how is the effect of these metabolites on infectious disease. Because we know that we need the inflammation to clear a pathogen. So the inflammatory response is very important for the clearance of the pathogen. But what is more important to prevent the disease when we have infection is to control this inflammation. And then, as we found this pro-resolutive effect of acetate, we decide to look at for infection, to study more the effect on infection. And then first, what this is previous result that has been published by the Daniela Dagoria group, that we have been found that first, that the microbiota is very important to stimulate the immune system to deal with bacterial infection, because germ-free mice, they are very more susceptible when we infect these mice with Klebsiella pneumoniae, that is a pathogenic bacteria. And they are more susceptible and they die very fastly because they have increased load of bacteria in the lungs. So suggesting that these mice, in the absence of microbiota, they don't have inflammatory response to deal with pathogen. And what was interesting is that when we observe on GPR43 knockout mice, they present the same phenotype. So these mice, in the absence of activation of GPR43, these mice also have more susceptibility to infection by Klebsiella pneumoniae in lung infection. And also they have more bacteria in the lung. So suggesting that there is absence of this signaling, it's very crucial to the host to promote inflammation and to clear, to deal with the infection. And what we did next was to colonize germ-free mice with commensal bacteria, that's the Bifidobacterium that we have in collaboration with Jacques Nicoli and Professor Flaviano Martin from the microbiology department. So what is very interesting from this bacteria, what is the particularity of this bacteria, is a commensal bacteria that have been isolated from healthy children. And they have been described to produce a lot of acetate compared with others, Bifidobacterium. So if we colonize germ-free mice with this bacteria, we can revert the phenotype of susceptibility to Klebsiella pneumoniae. And this phenotype was dependent on the survival of this bacteria, because if we treated these mice, germ-free mice, with the bacteria inactivate or dead, we could not see the same phenotype. So suggesting that we need the metabolites produced by this bacteria to promote and to restore the phenotype to the germ-free to deal with the bacteria. And also, we treated conventional mice with acetate just to confirm if it was treatment with acetate was possible to protect these mice from the infection with Klebsiella pneumoniae, and yes, we could see that treatment with acetate increased the survival of these mice, and also reduced the load of Klebsiella pneumoniae in the lungs. So this effect was not only specific for bacteria, because we have been showing in collaboration with a group here in Brazil, in the south, where we found that high fiber diets, for example, protect mice from infection by syncytial virus, the respiratory syncytial virus. So the mechanism was the same. So high fiber diet reduced the viral load, reduced the inflammation on the lung of mice that are infected with RSV. And also when we deplete, if we treated mice with the high fiber diet and we deplete the microbiota of them with antibiotic on these mice, we could not see more the phenotype, the beneficial effect of high fiber diet on these. So suggests that the effect of the high fiber diet to the host to deal with the infection is dependent on the microbiome. We also show that this is with François Trotten from France, that we have been found that when we infected mice with influenza virus, and these mice are more susceptible to a secondary infection induced by Streptococcus pneumoniae. And what they have been showing is that most of this susceptibility of these mice that have been previously infected with influenza was dependent on the production of short-chain fatty acids, since we could see that there is reduction of acetate, propionate, and butyrate on the feces, and also in the blood of mice that have been infected with influenza. And if we treated these mice after the infection with influenza with acetate, and then we infected them with Streptococcus pneumoniae, we could see that the treatment with this metabolite protects these mice from the secondary infection. And this effect also was dependent on the TPR43 activation, since we could not see the same phenotype, the protective effect phenotype on the TPR43 knockout mouse. So of course that during the pandemic everyone have been stopping, not everyone, but especially here in Brazil, we have to stop doing what we are doing in the lab. And for me, what was more concern is that first, we knew that most of the receptors that have been described to the SARS-CoV-2 to infect the lung is also expressed on the epithelial, on the gut. And we thought that maybe the microbiota could be involved on the SARS-CoV-2 infection. And then we decided to look how was the whole of the gut microbiota during the COVID-19 disease. And of course, at first we want to look at for the microbiota from health, to compare the health and the COVID-19. But during this time, a lot of papers, especially from China, have been found that, of course, the microbiome of the individuals that have been infected with COVID, especially individuals that have been hospitalized, they had a lot of difference on the gut microbiota modulation. And there is others papers showing that these alterations induced by COVID-19 have been prolonged for long time when the individuals just come out from the hospital. But for me, what I decided to explore is it's not only to know what is the difference between the microbiome of an individual that had COVID or not. We really want to explore what is the effect that this alteration could be involved to the individual. And then what we decide to do for that is first we decide to look for volunteers, for human volunteers here from the region here in Belo Horizonte. And this was, the samples was collecting the second wave of COVID here in Brazil. And what we decided to look at that time, even before that no one was talking about long COVID, we decided to look at individuals that had been infected by SARS-CoV-2, but that have been present asymptomatic or mild symptoms. So we didn't want to collect feces from individuals that have been with severe or moderate disease. So then we collect the feces and blood and we apply a survey for these individuals up to 1 to 4 months after the primary infection that they have been reported for SARS-CoV-2. And why we decide to do that is because we wanted to use the ELISA kit that we have to confirm if the individuals have been exposed or not to the SARS-CoV-2 infection. And that time, the only information that we had is that until 4 months, we could use the ELISA kit to validate, to confirm if the individual have been. After that, the antibodies go down, and then we could have like false positive. So our concern was with the individual that have never been exposed to SARS-CoV-2. So how will you confirm that they really never have been in contact, infected with the virus? And just something that I want to show that we apply a survey for these individuals, asking for the type of food they normally have. We describe among all the food that we asked for the functional foods, for probiotic intake, for many kind of beneficial food that they could be take. And although most of our individuals have been described as controls, low infected and post-COVID, that we call them, we have a few individuals that have been described as moderate. And what was interesting that these individuals that present the moderate symptoms when they have been infected, these individuals have reduced consumption of this type of food. So we don't know if this could be directly involved to the symptoms that they present, but we found that very interesting. And we, of course, we check for a lot of things that we know that can contribute to operate the gut microbiota. So, and there is a lot of, we look for the pre-existing disease that they had, compared control and post-COVID, but although some of them present, there is no difference between the group, both of groups. So they are very similar, considering the pre-existing disease that they have. And another thing that also was very important is that we checked for the SARS-CoV-2 virus particle in the feces, and we did not find the SARS-CoV-2 in the feces of these individuals. But when we look for the sequencing for the gut microbiota, we also, as expect, since these individuals have been asymptomatic or mild, they do not present much difference if we compare the beta diversity and alpha diversity of microbiome of these individuals. However, we, at that time, I had been working to infections induced by antimicrobial resistant bacteria, and as we know that during the pandemic, especially here in Brazil, there is an overuse and indiscriminate use of antimicrobials. So we decided to check for, we collect the feces and we culture these feces at the lab, and we isolate most of them Enterobacteriaceae groups, and we did the antimicrobial susceptibility test in the lab. And for our surprise, what we found that the individuals that have been exposed to the SARS-CoV-2, I mean the post-COVID individuals, they present a high phenotype of multi-resistance and resistance bacteria in the gut microbiome. And when we isolated this strain and we identified them here by mouth we found that Klebsiella strain species was one of the most, among the escape groups of bacteria, that is the group that's of high concern today for their WHO. Klebsiella was the most predominant here. So, and just to say a little bit about Klebsiella pneumoniae, I don't know if you are aware, but Klebsiella is a pathobiotic, so more than 70% of people in the whole world carry this bacteria in your gut. And this is an enterobacteria that, of course, when we have dysbiosis, they can grow and they can be selected, and our concern if they can be disseminated very quickly when we have dysbiosis. So just to check what would be the effect of this alteration on the gut microbiota phenotype that we found, we decided to make an experiment in the lab where we collect feces from these cohorts, from these donors, and we decide to look and we prioritize individuals that live in the same house. So people that have been infected, confirmed to be infected to SARS-CoV-2, and the same individuals in the same house that they have never been infected. We decided to do that just to try to reduce the changes that the gut microbiota could have, and also especially to consider that the diet habits of these individuals could be quite similar. Of course, that's never like that, but we try. And then what we did is we collect the feces, fresh feces. This is very important because it didn't work if we froze these feces and we did the fecal transplant. So we collect the feces and then we bring the feces to the lab, and then we make this fecal microbiota transplant to germ-free mice. And here is just an overview of what we have done, because we collected one donor for one mice receptor. And what we found first from these individuals is that the post-COVID donors here, they had reduction of protein fatty acid in the feces, and also they present increased levels of IgP in the blood, what is suggests that these individuals could have impair on the epithelial, in the gut epithelium. And our first result, what we found is that when we look at the germ-free mice that have been colonized with the post-COVID feces, they present increased levels of higher fat in the intestine. But again, we compare them, we did the sequencing of the feces of these mice after colonization, and we did not find many statistical difference between the microbiome of them. But what we found is that interesting, when we look at the lung of these mice, the post-COVID mice that received feces from individuals that had COVID, they had more inflammation in the lung. So the simple fact of we transplant the feces to these mice increased the inflammation on the lung of these mice. And when we made the individualization of these results, we found that if we look at for the post-COVID group of mice individually, we could see that the post-COVID mice that had less inflammatory cells in their lung, they had more production of acetate in the feces. So we are not sure if this protective effect could be dependent on the production, the high production of acetate in the feces. And of course, our concern is what could be the impact of this alteration in the lung from the post-COVID feces to the lung function. And what we did is we infected these mice, so it's a different experiment where we infected the post-COVID receptor mice with a strain, Klebsiella pneumoniae multi-resistant strain that have been described by Vasco group. And what we found is that mice that have been infected with Klebsiella pneumoniae multi-resistant and he received this from post-COVID individuals, they had more inflammation, exacerbated inflammation in the lung, and even that this inflammation had been higher than the mice that received feces from health individuals, it was not enough to clean the bacteria. So that is our concern now that we are seeing that the gut microbiota can impact the lung, the mass of the individual. And we are thinking about how could be this alteration to one infection, posterior possible infection, especially induced by multi-resistant bacteria. That is, of course, a difficult treatment. And again, when we look at for mice that have been infected by Klebsiella pneumoniae, the mice with post-COVID feces, they had decreased levels of acetate in the feces compared with the health control individuals here. So I know that directly related to the lung function here, but we found something that is very interesting from these mice. We could see that mice that receive feces from post-COVID individuals, they had impairment of the cognitive brain function. So what we hear is that these mice, they lost their capacity to recognize the object. So they lost the memory. So this is one of the mainly sequels that we are seeing from long COVID or post-COVID consequence. And we could see that the simple fact of transferring, make the fecal microbiota transference to germ-free mice could also induce this phenotype in mice. And we found that on the brain of these mice, there is more inflammation, so there is high expression of TNF on the brain, and also the reduction of neurotrophus mediators that is beneficial for the microglial, for example. And what we try to look at, if we treated these mice with, if we colonize these mice with probiotics, with the probiotics that we use, the commensal bacteria, the bifidobacteria bacteria that we know that produce a lot of acetate, could be this phenotype be reversed? And the answer is yes. So mice that have been treated with the probiotics, so they restore, when we see here that post-COVID mice lost the memory, the ability to explore new objects. When we treated them with the bacteria, we could see that the phenotype have been restored. So suggesting that, okay, target the gut microbiota modulation could be one interesting thing to restore or to restore the homeostasis, at least the brain homeostasis here. Just to confirm the effect of treatment with a probiotic on this long COVID sequence, we used with Professor Vivian from Mauro Teixeira group that have been developed mouse mice of coronavirus infection. And what we did is that we made the same behavioral experiment with these mice. And we could see that even on the coronavirus infection, these mice lost the ability to recognize new objects, so they have impairment on the cognitive memory. And when we treated these mice with Bact-Inflam, we could see that the treatment with the probiotic restored the ability of these mice, restored the memory of these mice. So just like simple. So just for you to take home message here, what I really want you to see is that, of course, we can use and we should use and consider it use our gut microbiota as a strategy to treat or to prevent disease. Especially, I'm talking about disease that affect, for example, lung, because we can target the microbiome not only to disease that affect the gut, but also other tissues as lung. And we should consider it to use the microbiome to try to minimize the long COVID sequence sequels. Especially, I'm just very worried about the silence pandemic that we are going to deal. I know that this has been highlighted for even before the COVID-19 pandemic, how is the concern about the antimicrobial resistant threats that we will have. But what I want to say is that the COVID-19 pandemic just accelerates in a very high speed way the problem that we will deal with them. I was just 3 days ago in Berlin in the World Health Summit, and it was very interesting that not here in Brazil, but I think in Europe especially, all the people now are concerned that this is a very, very, very important problem that we have to face on. So my take-home message here is that we need to use the microbiome as a target to prevent or at least decelerate this problem of antimicrobial resistance that we do. And of course, all your groups work with probiotics and use microbiome as a strategy, and we can work together to try to deal with this problem. So with that, I would like to thank you all my collaborators here in France, but especially my students that work very, very hard during the pandemic, even with the zero conditions that we have here during the pandemic. So thank you so much for the attention, and I would have been glad to get questions. Please.
Any questions?
Come on. Okay, I'm going to start. I have a question. It's more a technical question on how do you choose for your FMG protocol, your FMG experiment? How do you choose the stool from the control and the stool from the COVID? For example, in the COVID, I'm sure that you had also heterogeneity in the composition of the microbiota. So, did you choose the most different one from the healthy? How did you do that?
No, actually, we looked for the microbiome after that we did the fecal microbiota transplant. So we did not choose the donors based on the microbiome composition. So the selection for the donors was just based on the priority that we got is one, get the feces, fresh feces. So this was very laborious because we have to be like, okay, now I'm ready, so come here and get my pulse like that. And the second thing is to detect the SARS-CoV-2, and of course, if there is detection of the virus, we will just exclude, but we didn't find any of them. And the other thing is to get individuals, the families, same families where we had one individual positive and the other one control. So that was what we did.
So probably not a lot of choice.
Exactly, no. No choice.
No choice at all.
Yeah, and also because, that was very laborious experiment because we need the germ-free also at the same time. So during the pandemic, people said, okay, now you have a lot of germ-free, and then I have to follow up the people and say, can you give me? And that was not very easy to do.
Thank you.
Very nice talk, and we have a lot of common point of interest because, as you see, we are working very intensively on the use of secondary bacterial transmitted influenza virus with François Cotin and also on COVID-19. And my question concerns the bifidobacterium strains that you use. If I quite remember, I think 10 years ago, there was a kind of nature paper published by a Japanese group, which was called acetate paper. And in fact, they showed that using high acetate producing bifidobacterium strains, they were able to protect mice from Shiga toxin, if I well remember. And so I was wondering if the production, the acetate production of your strain, is it comparable to the Japanese ones, or are you producing more?
No, I mean, first they did a different type of methodology to measure the short infrared acid. So the concentration that the beef stew that we have produced. It's quite similar, but it's not. It's quite similar. But for us, I think what is more intriguing from this strain, the probiotic strain, is that Vasco made the genomic analysis of them and comparing with other bifidobacteria, even with this from the Japan. The metabolic pathway that they had, it's a very specific to acetate, to the production of acetate.
So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
In fact, in our lab, we are working also in the sensorial paper from François Trottin. Colleagues from my lab are involved, and we have identified a commensal bacterium which is able to produce a lot of acetate. This is a Blausia strain, and I was wondering if I think the use of bifidobacterium in humans would be much easier than the use of true commensal bacteria as Blausia, which has never been used in humans. So I think it would be interesting to test maybe in your model our strain and your bifido strain. So maybe it can be a kind of start of collaboration.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
I would be very interested to see this.
No, that would be very nice.
Whether if a true commensal bacterium has a kind of advantage in this kind of methodology.
Yeah, no, for sure, that would be very good.
So we should discuss that.
Yeah, sure.
Any more questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So that brings us to the end of today's meeting. May I thank you very much for allocating time to attend this meeting and also for your active participation during the whole conference. We hope you have enjoyed the program, and the committee members also recognize the importance of all the professors and researchers that contributed somehow to this event. All the French researchers for their collaboration, and especially for the creation of this International Associated Laboratory. The professors from UFMG and other institutions from Brazil that shared some of their knowledge with us today. It's also important to thank the Veterinary School of UFMG for hosting this meeting. And the last but not least, all the members of the committee that worked hard to make this meeting possible, especially Professor Flávio Figueira. Thank you very much. Yeah, tomorrow we'll have a thesis defense that will start at 9 a.m. See you there. Thank you.
Thank you.